Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Laurin Conlon, and this week I'm joined by Rick, our team mental health counselor. And this is going to be a very niche topic, but if you guys listened, I feel like it was a few podcasts ago, maybe like 3-4-ish. We did a podcast on, maybe more. I don't even know. Maybe it was more than that. Okay. It's like either one podcast ago or like 15. There's really no in between for my brain.
Last year sometime.
Last year, we did a podcast on porn and its effect on relationships. And while we were talking about that, something that you brought up in there that was really relevant and something that you've seen a lot with clients over the years was male sexual dysfunction in particular. And so we thought, why not do a podcast on this? And I know that we have a very female heavy audience. However, this could certainly be affecting, the men in your life or people that you know. And this is just a topic that I feel like is really, really uncomfortable, right? Like women are generally better at talking with other women about our own issues. Not always, but this kind of stuff, there's so much shame, I feel like, around it. Just sex in general. There's so much shame with dysfunction. But for this podcast in particular, we're going to cover male sexual dysfunction and kind of its effects. So I'm really going to be more so just guiding the conversation. I have no experience here, so this is...
Well, yeah, and I think as we were doing the porn podcast, and this is a very relevant topic because it happens a lot, and I don't think people understand necessarily. I think when we talk about porn and sexual and its relationship to us sexually, I think oftentimes the conversation gets steered in the way of, well, it changes the way men perceive sex, right? And so they want rougher sex, or they treat sex the way you would as a performer, when in reality it has other impacts. And one of the impacts that it has is it creates premature ejaculation in men. And so I wanted to just kind of cover this because, as you said, women are oftentimes really good about talking about sex. Unfortunately, there's a real roadblock when it comes to women or men talking about sex in their particular relationship. And in particular, for men to be able to bring this up if they're experiencing it, it can not only impact the relationship with their partner, male or female, but within themselves, like how they feel as a person, their level of confidence, their ability as a lover, etc. And so this can be something that actually can start early in childhood and then just be a lifelong problem until people really learn how to get a handle on it.
And then that shame and not talking about it, of course, is going to make this way worse, right?
It takes like it's just molehill into a mountain for sure. All right, so what I want to kind of just start getting into is some of how pornography creates this within us, okay? And so essentially when most men start learning about masturbation, they're teenagers, young teenagers, right? Whether they find a dirty magazine or they find pornography or whatever it is. And so what ends up happening is for most kids, they start masturbating in secrecy. Obviously, you're not like going to walk downstairs and be like, hey, mom, don't bother me for 10 minutes. Like I'm going to go, masturbate. So what ends up happening is these kids, men in particular, learn to start masturbating, obviously in private, and during times that they know they won't get caught, like late at night or early in the morning or like in the shower, whatever. And so as a result, they also know that there's people around and that they can be caught at any moment in time. So what they do is they start masturbating, and the goal is to reach climax and reach climax quickly. And so what ends up happening is you start to train your body at an early age to achieve orgasm very quickly. Right. And now this isn't an issue when you're just masturbating, especially if you don't have a lot of time, like that's fine. The problem is that when you start to get to a space where you start to experience sex with somebody, sex doesn't last very long. It can last sometimes, just a few seconds, up to 30, 40 seconds maybe, and then they're already kind of releasing. And so it becomes really embarrassing for men. And so the problem is that they've literally trained themselves to reach orgasm quickly. And so now as an adult, we have to go back and we have to start to retrain the body. And so some of the things that I want to talk about is some of the treatment, because we all know what the cause is, right? We know that by clicking on these porn websites, we're just feeding our brain with dopamine. Like every click is like more dopamine. And then the objective, again, is people are just watching porn, they're masturbating, they're reaching climax quickly. Sometimes they'll go again. Sometimes they're watching porn 2, 3, 4 times a day. And think about that. If you're watching porn once or twice a day and you're masturbating and you're reaching climax very quickly, it's like this repetitive motion. So your body just picks it up and doesn't really even think twice about it. And so it becomes a problem when you get older and you're in a relationship. So first thing we're going to talk about, and I'm actually going to start going into like what some of the treatment is and how to change this and how to rewire your brain so that you can last longer in bed. So one of the major concepts that we're going to start to talk about is tension in the body. Okay. And so one thing that a lot of men do is they have like what's called like the death grip, right? So if you think about tension in the body, and this is for men and women, a lot of times when we're having sex, we can be very tense, right? You'll hear women oftentimes talk about, I need to be able to relax and feel comfortable and feel safe in order to reach an orgasm. But with men, they tend to grip very tightly. And the reason they grip tightly is because that tension is what creates friction. And the more friction that you have, the tighter the grip, the sooner you'll reach orgasm. So the first thing we want to do, guys, is learn to avoid the death grip. And this could actually be used if you're a woman and you're like, how do I make him last a little bit longer? What are some tools or techniques that I can bring into the bedroom? Like, so if you're performing these acts, like try and be cognizant of that, especially if you have a partner who tends to, reach orgasm a little too quickly sometimes. So number one, we want to avoid the death grip. We do require some tension, obviously, in order to reach orgasm. Otherwise, you'll lose your erection.
Is this like a clinical term? I'm so interested. I mean,
what is the death grip?
Yeah.
No, I don't think.
Did you just like come up with it?
No, I mean, when you're talking about this, it's a common thing.
That's what I'm saying. Like, so, this is like a.
I mean, is it like, I don't know if you're going to find it in like the dictionary.
No,
like
I just meant like
DSM.
Is new thing in the DSM. No, it's just curious. Like, this is like something that you guys will use as like a phrase, like in treatment.
Yes, well, I've used it, and whenever I've used it, no guy has ever said to me, like, I don't know what you're talking about by death grip.
Yeah,
right? That's
why I'm like, okay, this is...
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, immediately I knew, but I was like, I've never heard or thought of a term for that.
So if you... okay, well, now you do. Now you have it. So think about it like this. If I require tension in my body in order to achieve orgasm, and every man does, it's the way the human body works, then one of the keys to understanding premature ejaculation is how to release tension in the body, right? And so when you think about, if an orgasm is based in tension, then when you think about all the muscles and everything that are involved in creating tension when a person is reaching orgasm, it's like you use your abs, right? Your core, your thighs, your quads, it's in your feet, it's in your chest. Like if you've ever had sex with a man, you'll notice, like, you'll see that tension when they're getting ready to reach orgasm. So that kind of knowledge is critical to preventing the orgasm early. And so we have to learn to relax our body during sex. And this is where porn sex and actual sex don't mix. Because what you watch a lot in porn is this super aggressive, highly volatile, rough sex where it's like there's just like like you can see the entire body's almost tense, right? And porn actors are not generally real people. They do different things. They use drugs. They use injections. They do things to prolong their stamina. Mm-hmm.
They're all AI generated.
They will be soon.
They will
enough.
be.
So will all the actors in the world. So where do we store tension in the most where in the body do most men store tension when they're having sex? Most men will store tension in their abs and around their thighs, usually somewhere around your genitals, right? And so when you masturbate, and this is what's going to happen, we're going to have to masturbate before we start to have sex, not like the same day necessarily. We will get to that toward the end, but as you're practicing, this is the stuff you're going to need to practice in order to eventually have longer lasting sex. So as you're practicing sex or practicing masturbating, you want to learn to, as you're reaching an erection and you're starting the process of masturbating, you want to literally, like I'll tell people to close your eyes and pay attention to where in your body you feel tension. That could be like, you might see people like curling their toes, You might see people like their quads are super flexed or tight. You might feel like their abs or their abdominal area is really tight, their chest, their arms, wherever. And so just like any other muscle relaxation technique, you want to like start to breathe heavier, not shallow, but take deeper breaths. And you want to pay attention to where the tension is and start to release that tension. Now remember, you're alone. You're just masturbating. This isn't with a partner. And so the idea becomes, if I can learn to relax my body, I learn to reduce the tension in my body, which pushes orgasms out further and further, right? Because when you want to orgasm, you'll learn to create tension in your body. So the key to maintaining longer sex drive in men is releasing tension in the body, staying as loose and pliable as possible, right? This requires breath work. This requires paying attention. This is where mindfulness comes into play, right? And I know anybody who's been in the mental health field for a while has heard the term mindfulness. People listening to this podcast, even not on the ones that are mental health, I've heard you mention, mindfulness. So it's a concept of really being present in the moment, and you have to be starting to pay attention to what you're feeling and where in your body you're feeling it. Because that tension is really important in understanding where you are in the process of going from 1, which is completely like limp, to 10, which is having an orgasm. And we need to know where we rate on that scale. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So I want you to scan your muscles top to bottom. And I want you to find the tension, and I want you to release that tension. I want you to breathe. I want you, while you're masturbating, I want you to practice relaxing those muscles. Your abdominals, your core, your quads, whatever it is. Okay. So that's the point. You envision the muscle literally relaxing. So like if you picture my fist as like the muscle that's tense, as you breathe, you're just slowly starting to relax it to the point where there's no more tension in that area. Okay. The next thing, the more you focus on your body and what's going on in you, you will last longer. Now, I'm not saying don't pay attention if you're trying some of this during sex to not look at your partner. But in the beginning, stop looking at your partner. And the reason I say that is I don't mean it, don't make eye contact, right? I don't mean don't be present in the moment. But what a lot of men will report is that they're having sex, and it's kind of like if they find themselves staring off into space or something else, like they're not focusing on what they're doing. So if they like look down and they see their partner's breasts or vagina or something like that, like they get super aroused right away, and that arousal creates tension, and then they release. And so you might want to work on finding different areas to focus on during sex. And sometimes people are so much in their head when they're having sex, right? Like they're like there's this anxiety about performance even before we get there. And they're like, there's this anxiety when you're having sex with somebody, like, do they like it? Are they enjoying themselves? Like, am I going to make my partner reach orgasm? Like, this is a big deal for people. And all this anxiety just stays stuck in our heads. And women have said the same thing back and forth. And so what this does is it takes us out of this thought process, this like dangerous loop of anxiety and what's the thoughts, what are my stories, what's the narrative I'm telling myself in this particular space. And it's more about like, where am I in my body? Like, where's the tension? Where's my anxiety? Where's my fear? And I'm just breathing through this, and I'm relaxing, and I'm taking my time.
And there's also, I think there is this perception, and maybe that's, again, porn, conditioning, movies, whatever it might be, right? It's like a lot of guys, I think that they have to just be like, just rock hard for like 30 minutes and like, have this crazy performance. And it's like, it's also okay to just like take a minute. You know what I mean? Like that would be more enjoyable than like 30 seconds. Yeah. You have an orgasm, right? Like, hey, let's maybe like slow down. Let's do something else. Let's switch positions. Let's do what, like there's a ton of other things to do instead of just like, and I think that is part of what is so challenging with porn. 'Cause like I said, like you watch and it's just like, it's not really applicable to real life. And to be honest, most women don't really want that either. You know what I mean? There's times, you know what I mean? Like there's different times, there's different people, there's different preferences. Of course, it's a whole different discussion. But I can definitely say that I think more women would probably be interested in someone who is like taking their time and actually like there is, just more time to be had and less just like, okay, let's get in, let's get out. Right. And sometimes, hey, we got like a few minutes, like that's a different story. But when we're talking about like repeated, issues here. And like, is that creating more issues? And like you said, like, is this anxiety creating, all these problems? And I think that it's so mental. It's literally so mental.
It is.
Like, yes, there are certainly times where, there's hormones involved for both parties, right? Like hormonally, it's pretty clear, right? Like if different hormones are skewed too high or too low, that's going to create sexual dysfunction for men and women. But for our topic today, and then just, I would say in general, this is way more important. Like the mental aspect of it has way more of an impact. I would say. No, like outside of extremes, of course,
right.
Like if you have zero testosterone, like, yeah, it's going to be kind of hard, but most people, even if they're on the lower end of normal, are still able to function.
Right. And what makes this more mental to me than it does physical is the mental is driving the reaction within the physical body. The body's going to react naturally without you thinking about it. And so your mind has to be engaged in what you're feeling, where the tension is, in order to perform the way that you really want to perform. And you're right. I think there's a big misconception for most people that they're like, I don't need porn sex. I want good sex. Yeah. And good sex can be
actual intimacy,
slower, longer. It can be changing positions. It can be, switching things around. We're going to kind of cover some of that too. So when you guys are doing this, obviously the thing to remember is to practice that body awareness, that mindfulness, like where in my body do I store tension? And as I'm masturbating, I want to release that tension. I want to focus not just on my rhythm of masturbating, but I want to focus on the tension in my body and releasing that while I'm masturbating so that my body feels completely relaxed. Okay. Now, one of the next things I want to talk about is what's called edging. Are you familiar with edging? Okay. Most people are.
That was going to be my next question.
What's that?
That was going to be a question I had, if that would be useful.
Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, remember 1 being completely limp and 10 being orgasming. For most men, you want to be able to catch yourself and start the edging process right when you get to that like 7, maybe 8 mark, right? Because anything past that, it's like the point of no return. Like once you reach a point, it's happening. And so we need to know our body well enough to know like where that point is and how to pull back from that. So what is edging and how does it work? Edging relies on us being able to utilize and engage the pelvic floor muscles. And we're going to talk about pelvic floor muscle training and what to do with that. And this is also where people who exercise sometimes have an advantage because squats, things like that, they tend to engage the pelvic floor. So there's a strengthening of that. And when you have a strong pelvic floor connection, so to speak, your ability to prevent ejaculation becomes much easier. Okay. So what is edging? Edging is basically you bring yourself to the point where you're about to reach orgasm and then you stop, right? And you allow the intensity of the moment and what you're feeling to die down. And then once it starts to die down, you start masturbating again. You bring yourself back up to that point. So when I'm saying bringing yourself back up to that point is you're sitting down. By the way, guys, get good lube. If you don't have good lubrication, like there's going to be too much tension. Lubrication can release tension and it allows just for a more enjoyable process. The skin around the pelvic area is actually much thinner, which is what can make people susceptible to sexually transmitted diseases like contact diseases, because the skin's different than it is in other parts of your body, which means it can get torn and bruised and scabbing can occur if you're using too much tension. So that's the whole death grip thing. And use good lubrication. Store-bought water-based lubrication is great. Whatever your preference is, go for that. So you're starting to masturbate and you get your erection and you're moving forward and you feel the tension building. Remember, you have to start to learn where that point is, that 7 to 8. That's where you really want to stop and back off. And so if you're masturbating, you get to that 7 or 8, you stop, and then you start to breathe. Breathing is going to help reduce the tension. Remember, you're supposed to be paying attention to you in this process. Where is the tension in my body, right? Because as you're getting closer and closer to orgasming, your body's going to start to tense up, and it will relax. So that's why this is important. If you don't want to orgasm, guys, you have to stay relaxed. This is critical to it, because if you start tensing your body, orgasm is coming. And so edging requires us to masturbate, get to that 7 or 8, that point just before the point of no return, and breathe our way through it, relax our body, and then start masturbating again. And you do this about 3, maybe 5 times per masturbation session. So if you're masturbating and it's like within a minute or 2 and you feel yourself ready to go, you stop and breathe. And then start masturbating again. Bring yourself back to that point, stop and breathe. Relax, release the tension in your body, and you keep doing this. Now, why are we doing this? Think about this as it relates to the 13-year-old version of you or 14-year-old version who's like jerking off in your bedroom really quickly so that no one in your house hears. You're now training your body to say, okay, I'm getting to this point, I'm stopping. I'm getting to this point, and I'm stopping. And you just keep doing that. So your body is learning, like, okay, we're going to keep backing off. Like the goal and the way your body starts to adjust is like, oh, maybe he doesn't want to reach orgasm anymore. This is different from everything we've ever done. And so it takes a while to feel familiar with this. And one of the other common issues that develops in this space is that you can actually start to lose a little bit of your erection during this, right? Because you're masturbating, you're bringing yourself up to that point, and then you're stopping. And so because you're not touching it, like literally, like let it go. There's an old technique. It was called the Masters and Johnson's. I forgot what it was called. It was like the penis grip or something. No joke.
All these grips, all these names.
Well,
I love it.
If you were to take your thumb and place it on the belly side of the penis, right, like in there, and you take your 2 fingers and you put them at the top, like kind of where the circumcision occurs, like right at the top of the penis, and you squeeze. You're essentially kinking the hose, right? And you're stopping the flow of ejaculation. And what this does, again, Masters and Johnson created this technique, and it prevents people from orgasming. You can literally hold that for like a really long time and you'll never orgasm. It's just very punitive, very rough. It's very old school, and you don't need to do it.
Who was like, hey, you know what we're gonna study today?
Sex therapist. Yeah. That's who's like, hey, you know what we're going to study today? So
we're going to put our hand here. No, not there. Shit. No, not there.
Just understand if you're, I know, right? What was that thought process? Like all the way up, all the way down.
They're studying. Yeah. Oh, that wasn't it. No, wrong again.
Clearly didn't work.
I just think from a research perspective, like obviously you had to come up with how to do this.
It's a hell of a trial and error, isn't it?
Man, those subjects are real disappointed. They're like, this is such a terrible study.
Yeah, right. How do you be an active participant in that study? Little audience participation.
All the sex studies are hilarious. Just imagine, like there are certain, studies that they've done where you have to go into a lab and they're testing just different things. And it's like, that's just so, that'd be just so strange. Like that would just be so weird to me.
So back to our subject.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Of course I had to derail us.
Remember, as you're practicing edging, it is very common for you to start to lose your erection. You'll have to masturbate. You'll get it back. Don't speed up the masturbation just to get your erection back to full mass.
And if you lose it, is that common?
Totally common.
Yeah. So
completely common. And you'll get better at controlling it once you start to use more of your pelvic floor muscles. So let's get into pelvic floor. Pelvic floor muscles are really important in understanding the orgasming process and reaching climax for men. So the pelvic floor muscles, the best way that I can use to describe them, are the same muscles that you would use to cut off your pee midstream, for men at least. That's what I've been taught. That's what I've heard. If there's another way for you to conceptualize it, because you've worked with male clients in the past, and I would assume...
not in this capacity. I
just from a sex therapy
no,
perspective.
I know.
I meant
yeah, I haven't.
Okay. I just didn't know if pelvic floor training was because that's a common thing for some people who have had trauma or injuries. So
yeah, I've only ever talked about it with female clients, to be honest.
Okay.
Mostly, yeah.
Okay.
So
when now I'm going to derail us for a second. Pelvic floor muscles for women are the same. Would you use the same terminology? Like the pelvic floor muscles for a woman are the ones that are used to cut off your urine?
Honestly, I'm so not a specialist in this area, so I don't even want to say yes or no and be totally off base.
Gotcha.
We did do a podcast a long time ago. I can confirm that it was a long time ago, but I believe it is even titled pelvic floor. It was with Taylor Summers, my friend, who's a PT. But no, I don't even want to say and then be wrong. So
okay.
I don't.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I don't know either. So
not my. I should know more, but because it is super important for women for just general health and how they feel, but also as it relates to sex. But
so kind of the guide to improving pelvic floor muscles and how it's used in our process for understanding orgasms is, number one, for men, engaging the muscles that you use to cut off your pee midstream. Every guy has done this. We've gone to the toilet, we cut our pee off sometimes because something's happening. So like, it's those muscles that we're starting to engage. And so what I want people to do is we want to start practicing squeezing and engaging those muscles. And what's great about this is you can literally practice it everywhere and anywhere. Like you can sit in a chair right now and start engaging those muscles. And so, and literally that's exactly what I'm going to ask you to do. And if you don't have the ability to do it for very long, that's okay. There's a process to building up to this. So essentially you can be sitting in a chair. What I want you to do is I want you to clench and tighten up the muscle that you would use to cut off your urine midstream. Hold that for a second. If that's as long as you can hold it, you hold it for a second and then release it. Okay? Take a couple of deep breaths. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to work your way up the chain here. So if we can only hold it for a second, then maybe we're going to go up to 5 seconds, and that's going to be the goal. So I'm going to flex it and I'm going to hold it for 5 seconds, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're going to release it. And you're going to keep doing this process, and you're going to, whatever the goal is, like if it's, say, 10 seconds, right? You're going to do 10 seconds for 10 times, right? If it's only 5 seconds, 5 seconds for 10 times. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And ideally, I'd like you to be able to the goal is to work the stretch to the point where you can do it for about 30 seconds, right? Now, you can practice pelvic floor stretching in multiple different ways. Like you can slowly ease into it where you like feel the muscle slowly starting to tense.
You mean strengthening?
Or strengthening.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you didn't want to say stretching on purpose.
Okay.
For a different reason.
I meant stretching the time. Sorry. Yeah, no, I'm not. Like, it isn't like a yoga position.
I know, that's why I was like, wait, I don't think that's what you meant, but I want to make sure.
Good point. No, good point. You can do this like soft, you can do this hard, you can do it like quickly, like where you're like flexing the muscle, like just to gain control of it. And in bodybuilding, as I've been, starting to lift more and more, I've heard the term mind-muscle connection all the time. They're like, do the, mind-muscle connection. Like that's essentially what we're trying to do here. Is create the connection between what am I feeling in my body and this particular muscle when I flex it and my mind. And I think some men will see that when they tighten this muscle, other muscles are engaged with it too. Like your sphincter is there. You might feel tension in your quads and in your abs. And this is the part of the body that engages when you're orgasmic. So your ability to strengthen this part, it directly relates to your ability to prolong ejaculation. And when you think about edging and you think about pelvic floor muscles, you start to combine the two. That's where we start to see the most benefit. So like I'm edging and I'm relaxing and I'm bringing myself up to orgasm, right? So I get to that 7 or 8 and I stop and I engage my pelvic floor, right? I don't just like let go and hope for the best. I stop masturbating, I breathe, and I engage my pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor prevents the ejaculation from occurring because I have a stronger pelvic floor muscle. What we find is that men who have premature ejaculation have weak pelvic floors. And so the tightening of the pelvic floor, the strengthening of it, prolongs sex. Okay? So again, the goal is to get to like 30 seconds. You want to be able to do that like 2, maybe 3 times. Like masturbate, engage the pelvic floor, hold it for 30 seconds. Masturbate, bring yourself back up to that 7 or 8. You're going to edge, you're going to stop, you're going to engage the pelvic floor, hold it for 30 seconds. And breathe while you're doing this. Because sometimes what will happen is men will be like, they're doing this, they'll go to engage the pelvic floor, and they just stop breathing. And if you stop breathing, what builds? Tension. Breathe. Be able to breathe and engage the pelvic floor. And so kind of a guide for this would be the first week you're doing this or you're practicing this, especially if you're not in a relationship, guys, like this is the time to start to practice this. Certainly if you have an understanding partner, and this is where my encouragement would be to women, and we're going to talk about this, but if you have a guy who struggles with premature ejaculation, and we just did a podcast on nonverbal cues, right? Every nonverbal and verbal cue is going to send him a message about what his performance is like in bed for you. And so if you want this to be different, all I can do is encourage you to be as understanding and as compassionate. Compassionate is probably the best word that I could use to describe this. This isn't something he wants either. And so there's already a ton of shame and disappointment that he feels toward himself and his ability as a lover or as a husband or as a boyfriend or whatever. And I guess I shouldn't just say this to women, because for men it applies too, depending on whatever relationship you're in. You really want to work hard to be understanding of this problem and work with them and not shame them, not be disappointed, not do the, again, like that kind of stuff. Like, that's not going to help. You know what I mean? So if you are in a relationship and this is happening, right?
No, I think that's like the best thing that you could have said, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Man, if I could like just script a perfect response.
Right.
Not this again.
It's like the worst nightmare come true.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, how are ways, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? Like, it's not like we need to talk about this. Like, it's pretty clear that it's happening, right? Like, both parties are aware. And obviously sometimes this is like a transient thing, which could certainly be like stress related, mindset related, whatever. But if this is more of like a continual issue, right? Like you pretty much know. So do you think that it's better, like, for the, like, what partner should bring it up? Like, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess not, but like, is there a better approach here? Like, obviously, again, like, there might be some men listening, but there could be more women listening to this. And if they are, and they're like, man, like, I know my partner struggles with this. They feel a lot of shame around it. I don't really know how to bring it up because it is kind of this elephant in the room. But if they want to say something, like, how would you recommend that?
Be gentle.
Yeah.
Okay. And this isn't something that because unfortunately, right, like, even if you have a great partner and she's like, I'll do whatever it takes to help him. Like, we can go slow. We can change the way we have sex, all this kind of stuff. Everything that I'm just described and I'm going through has absolutely nothing to do with your partner and everything to do with that person. So if he's not engaged in it, you're going to have very minimal results. But if you can bring up the subject and just even find some softer ways to approach it, like, hey, I feel like our sex, we always kind of focus on it being like kind of rough and dirty. Like, can we shift it a little bit? Like, I would really like to maybe slow things down for a little bit and just kind of spend time with like more foreplay. Let's experiment with different massage oils or toys or games or things like that, where the objective isn't necessarily to reach orgasm. And this, again, is where intimacy also starts to come into play. I think all too often for men in particular, women too, I'm not saying this, but men in particular, they approach sex with one objective, to reach orgasm. And more importantly, they approach sex with the objective for their woman to reach orgasm, or their partner, sorry. And so it's like, if that's all sex is to you, is reaching an orgasm, this is going to be a bigger issue. Sex is many things, which includes orgasms, but it is also a way to experience a deeper connection, emotional intimacy, feelings of safety and trust. Like, all of those things are included in this. And so I think one of the things that I try and work on with men who are working through this problem is to get them to reshape the way that they see sex. Because why do we watch porn? Just to reach orgasm. It's exciting. It's a dopamine hit. We want to ejaculate. We want to reach orgasm and be done. And so it's like we have to reshift the way we think about sex and our perception toward it. So the first week, I want you to start lightly. I would like you to do like once a day, perhaps, and be gentle and delicate, and don't use a lot of power. Don't go to the extremes here, right? We're just practicing edging and pelvic floor muscles engagement. You're going to practice this when you're masturbating. The second week, especially, this is better if you're alone, but you can practice it twice a day. Do one session in the morning and one session in the evening. I've had clients who are like, they're so dedicated to changing this process, they will do it without reaching orgasm anymore. Like, they'll pull out their lube, or they'll go in the bathroom or wherever, the shower, and they'll practice edging and pelvic floor engagement without orgasming. Like they'll say, okay, in the morning I'm going to go in the shower and I'm going to do this for 10 minutes. And so they masturbate for 10 minutes, they breathe, they engage the stuff, and then they're done. They don't reach orgasm. And by the way, blue balls is a lie. Okay, so if there's anybody listening to this and they're like, people are complaining about blue balls, and if I don't get off, I'm going to be backed up and clogged up, and like this is going to cause pain and discomfort. Like, they're lying. It's not. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you have an erection for a long time, that can be slightly painful. And men, if there's any of you out there that are having erections longer than like 3 or 4 hours, you need to go to the hospital, because you can actually start to damage the blood vessels and the capillaries in the penis, and that can cause other issues, which is why, like, when they take Viagra and they say if you have an erection lasting longer than 4 hours, you need to go to the hospital. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, what they do to you when you go to the hospital is they basically stick a syringe in your penis and extract the blood. Yeah. It's not a pleasant experience, and it ain't a small needle either. Oh, so, yeah. Those of you need to be really careful, because that's happened a few times when people are starting to. The other sexual dysfunction is erectile dysfunction. So sometimes when people have the problem of losing their erection, they'll start popping those little blue pills. And I don't know every pill that's out on the market, but some of the stuff that people are buying like over the counter at like a 7-Eleven or a Walgreens or something isn't necessarily pharmaceutical grade.
Oh no, those are
or doctor prescribed.
The gas station dick pills are like, oh my God. Like, like I also just imagine being like, okay, this is a good idea. Like, no, this feels like a really good idea.
This was a drunk idea.
But that's a good point, because I think people take that stuff and like, Viagra, Cialis, and like, sometimes it's just like fun. Sometimes there's reasons people take it, whatever. But if you do it constantly, there's also then this like mental perception too, right? Because you do get accustomed to that response.
Right.
So I feel like I don't know if that's been studied or not. I'd be really interested in that, because while it's certainly definitely needed for some people, right? Like there's prescriptions for reasons. But I would be interested to see like how that just changes like perception over time, like can you now have sex without it, mentally? It's kind of like when people take Adderall, right? And this is not a blanket statement, but from a lot of people that I know who've taken Adderall for a long time, they start to feel like they're just in a different space without it, right? Like they don't feel like they can do as many things without it. And part of that is because, yes, like some people truly need that. Some people, but there's plenty of people who take Adderall who aren't necessarily prescribed it, and they just take it a lot, and then they become accustomed to how that feels to be super dialed in and focused for an extended period of time that is not natural, right? For people who don't have ADHD and are not prescribed it, like it's not normal to work for 18 hours straight with like no breaks, like that's not how our brains are designed. So this is not a knock on people who take Adderall at all. It's just that concept. So of course, when you sit down and you can only focus for 2 hours, then you're like, oh my gosh, see, I need the Adderall. And it's like, but do you, or is it now this perception, right? So that's where it's so interesting. And I would just be really curious. I don't know if there's any research on that with like long-term use with individuals, but probably not, because how's there going to be a study for people who are recreational, Cialis users? Like they're not going to have that.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
be interesting to see. I mean, I haven't looked for that research yet, but so the first week, once a day, do it gently, no power. The second week, you can do it twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. The third week, you still continue with 2 sets, but add a little bit more pressure to it. And again, engage your pelvic floor. Like if you're training your pelvic floor every day, you'll feel it starting to strengthen. You'll feel stronger with it. You'll feel that you can hold it from 1 second to 5 seconds to 10 seconds to 30 seconds. But if you feel like your pelvic floor muscles are sore, then I want you to go see a doctor. Like there's a difference between tightening it and controlling it versus it being like sore or sensitive to the touch. You know what I mean? So I want you to like sore muscles aren't good in this particular space. Right? I know people listen to this are heavy into bodybuilding. So like, everybody talks about like their pump or how depleted they are the next day. And they're like, oh my God, that was great. Like this isn't that kind of soreness.
This is not that.
Yeah. So here's what I want to also talk about when it comes to fantasies and visualization. Okay. So what happens with men in particular who watch pornography, and I feel like this could happen to women, but sex from a woman's perspective is something I'm not an expert on, obviously, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know if you want to lend your own opinion to it or what other women have told you, but when we watch pornography, what ends up happening is the typical male sits down and let's just say he's doing this for a half hour. He's engaged for a half hour. He's probably clicking 50 or 60 different images. And he's not just looking at the same woman usually. This is like he's clicking different images of different women over and over again. So what's happening is we train our brains to visualize and fantasize about other people, right? And let's be honest, most women do not look like porn stars. Now, what I will say is there's a fair amount of porn actresses these days that are more typical of like the typical physique you would see, not necessarily like the old school 1980s kind of porn star. But the idea is if you're fantasizing about somebody else or something else all the time, right? And you've been married or in a relationship for a while and you're used to seeing your partner, right? Your partner becomes less and less sexually attractive to you, and you just keep creating fantasies about women and situations and things that are never going to happen for you. So you're like kind of stacking the deck against yourself. So how do you get better at sex? How do you have better sex with your partner? First thing that you need to do is I want you to cut out pornography. You've got to learn to turn it off, right? This could mean buying apps that restrict your access on your phone if you're using it on your phone. This could be making sure that you don't have computers in the house that you can do this. Again, restrict access on the computer. Because that's like, I don't know anybody who has access to porn in any other capacity than through their phone. Like, it's not like magazines or DVDs or videos used to be, right? You know,
the DVD on.
I don't even think Playboy does nudes anymore. I think it's just like a completely different magazine. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked on that. So eliminate porn throughout this entire process. And now this is going to be the scariest part for some of the guys. You want to know why? Because some of them won't get an erection. They will not be able to get not just a full erection, but some of them won't be able to, they'll be like completely limp. And it's like, why am I practicing masturbating if I'm completely limp? Because your brain has become so overstimulated with pornography that the actual sex doesn't stimulate you anymore. And now this process to where it takes your brain time to rewire itself occurs. It can take several months for this to come back. It will come back though. I promise you it will if you stop watching porn. Because here's the problem. They sit down, they're like, I can't get an erection, and they're now used to orgasming all the time. Right? And so this is like what true addiction is, right? And so they're like, I need my hit. Like, I want to get an erection. I want to do this. So what are they, like, the urge is to do what? Like, pick up your phone, go to whatever porn website you like, and start masturbating. And then what ends up happening is you're feeding into the loop. This is no different than the addict, you know, the heroin addict or the meth addict or whoever. And it's
same pathways.
We need to learn to do this. And so the idea becomes understand that if you're not getting an erection during this period in time, that's okay. That's normal. I want you to trust in this process. Like, we have to trust in this process. And if you're this person, it's going to take a while. It'll happen. But if you stop watching porn, your body will naturally start to see things differently.
Yeah, I would say from a female perspective, and this is, again, just general, right? There's plenty of women who watch porn. I'm not one of them, so I really can't like comment. Like, I've never found that interesting or intriguing personally. I would literally rather watch like a movie, like, you know, like a real movie. And like, they're just like, there's like the tension building. Like, that's more arousing to me than watching like cheap, cheesy porn. Personally, I know people love it. Not for me. What I have learned is that there are a ton of women who are interested in, like this more, like, they call it smut. You know about this? It's like the fantasy, like romance novel type stuff. And generally, again, I'm sure there are men who read this, but it's mostly a female driven genre. And there's always similar types of things, right? There's always like, you know, there's like a beast, or there's like this werewolf, or there's like a castle, or there's a what, like it's all this like fantasy type like lore to it. But then there's always the like, there's this tension, and the books are 400 plus pages, and it's like, so you get like these long drawn out details, but then there's, you know, obviously there's going to be sex scenes, and some of them are like way heavier into that, right? Like some, you know, you're a few pages in, allegedly, I haven't read these, but like you're just like, oh, okay. So it's kind of like the female version of porn, right? But it's just like written, and there is a fantasy, a fantasizing component of it, right? But when you think about it, it really is the same thing, because now you're externalizing that fantasy, right? You're thinking about, you know, the guy, or the, I guess in this case, maybe a creature, whatever, in this book, right, that you're drawn to. And it can become just as much of an escape, even though it's more, like it would be kind of weird. I'm sure people do it, but it'd be kind of weird if you just like sat down like on a plane and were like watching porn, right? Like you might be like, whoa, little weird. That'd be really weird. Really, okay. Okay.
I'm just clarify that.
Let's clarify. Really weird.
I don't know what plane rides you're on, but
honestly, I've been on so many fucking planes. The chances are there's somebody who's been watching porn. But
what airline is that too? I don't. Channel 10 has softcore porn. Spirit Airlines.
Spirit does everything wrong, so I'm just going to say it's probably Spirit. But okay, so yeah.
Now this podcast is getting shut down.
Spirit Airlines sues me.
Figured out how to kill it.
We've been so careful with how we've said everything this whole time. No, so like it would be weird, right? I was trying to downplay. It'd be fucking weird if somebody was just watching porn in public. Yeah, people probably do it, but it's weird. I can sit down and read a book anywhere. And like, it's kind of one of those, like, if you know kind of things, because you see like the title, if like, you know what it is, but nobody's going to be like, hey, that's inappropriate, or that's. So part of the issue there, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these kind of books, but if someone is finding themselves, I could see how it could go down that same path where like now you're only fantasizing about this, like this world. It's kind of like how video games are, right? Like you create a whole world. Now I know I'm definitely tangenting, sorry, but you create this whole world and you can live in this world and live in this fantasy. And like, why wouldn't you want to live in that? Because it's totally like different than your real life. So all of like fantasizing is fantastic, and they're clearly like for the rest of your life, if you're with one partner, like, yeah, you might have fantasies of other people or other situations. Like that's going to happen. And that's not what we're saying. Like never do that. That is warranted for sure. And probably healthy. But if you're constantly only doing that, then I feel like that can create an issue, because who is going to, like, for the men, like most women are not going to live up to whatever situation that you're watching, right? With whatever like complexity or, is happening there. And then for the women, like, most men aren't going to be like a king who lives in this castle and is also a werewolf and has all these stuff. So, and I know that sounds silly, but it's like, that's what we can all get caught up with. So I think that the fantasy aspect is super important, and I think it's fun to like do that with other things, but you have to be able to then at some point link it back to your partner, right? Especially if you're having issues. And
this is where fantasy versus visualization plays a role. Number one, and I think if we're all being honest, we can recognize this. Go back to the period in your life before you had sex, okay? When you were still a virgin, and your thoughts and fantasies about sex and what it was going to be like. And it was like, oh my God, this is going to be, like whatever you thought it was going to be. After the first time you had sex, we were all of us were probably like, that wasn't what I expected. Right? Like it was okay, but it did not match the fantasy. And this is the problem. Most of the time, the fantasies we create don't match the expectation of what reality really brings. And so the fantasy is always greater in our head. And then when we do the thing that we're fantasizing about, we're like, oh, that's not that bad. After that, though, you tend to then visualize or fantasize more in relationship to the realities of sex and what it's going to feel like and what it's actually going to be like and all those kinds of things. And so your expectation of your fantasy starts to change usually. But the first time most people have sex, they're just kind of like, that wasn't what I expected. Like it was different. And so fantasy versus visualization. I want you to move away from fantasy. I want you to stop trying to create these things. And what I want you to do is I want you to visualize sex with your partner. And so this becomes like, well, I have sex with them all the time. Why do I want to visualize it? Because This is the person you're going to have sex with. This is the person that I want you to get an erection with. I don't want you to get an erection to 60 different women on YouPorn. I want you to get an erection towards this one person or whoever that person is, right? And so what do I mean by that? By visualizing the real person that you're with, and you start to masturbate to that, you're creating a link in your mind between sexual arousal and this person. You're creating a link between this and the actual reality. And so I want you to, as you're masturbating, I want you to think about her real body or his real body. I want you to think about what it'll be like while you're having sex. I want you to imagine them moaning. I want you to imagine what their skin feels like. I want you to imagine what they might smell like. I want you to imagine their taste and their touch. And every aspect of it, use your senses and engage in that process. Because what ends up happening then is if you're visualizing this person while you're having sex, like if you're at home and you're masturbating and you're closing your eyes and you're creating the visualization of what it's going to be like to have sex with this person, then you're having sex with this person. You know what's happening now. Like, you know what to expect. This is kind of like you ever heard a coach, like, you practice how you play? Mm-hmm. This is what we're doing. I'm not creating, like, I'm not going to go play against Michael Jordan. I'm going to go play against the high school basketball person, right? That or whatever. You get my point, right? I'm not creating this unrealistic fantasy. I'm actually creating sexual arousal with the person that I'm with, and by visualizing and fantasizing about them. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And as you progressively learn to utilize all these skills, you start to notice your erection comes back. Guys, I need you to not give up on the process. If you're not able, if you cut off porn and you're like, oh my God, it's been a week, I haven't had an erection. Like, don't quit. Stick with it. Like, it'll come back. It just takes time. It depends on how far down the rabbit hole you are.
I know you said before a few months, possibly.
Yeah, like 4 or 5 months sometimes.
Okay. So is that like a standard time course, or
everybody's different?
So yeah,
it's going to be, you'll have people who are like, they cut it off porn and they don't have any problems. Mm-hmm. There's people who cut off porn, it's like months later before they're finally erect. And they get worried about that because they're used to masturbating all the time. Mm-hmm. They're used to having porn. They're used to having an erection. And now suddenly, it's like, that's the part I try to use to calm them down. It's like, look, we stopped porn. And when you were watching porn, you can get an erection, right? So we know it's not physical. Mm-hmm. It's mental. Yeah. Right? Because if you can't get an erection, you wouldn't be able to get an erection.
Yeah, if only one thing has changed, then it's that thing. It's not your body all of a sudden.
Identify the variable that causes it. So, and then obviously, if you are with somebody, how to prepare for sex. For some people, we need to masturbate the day of, right? If you know you're going on a date and it's that special date, where you're like, okay, I got invited over once before and we kind of fooled around and, made it thus far, but I know the next time we're together, like, it's going to cross that threshold. Like, sometimes, masturbating for about 10 to 15 minutes earlier in the day can help relieve some of that tension. Again, while you're masturbating, practice your edging, practice your breathing, reducing tension, pelvic floor engagement, all that kind of stuff. Understand that having sex or being intimate with somebody can be very nerve-wracking, right? It's a very intense feeling. That social anxiety, that part of us just starts to creep in, like that fight or flight, so to speak. And so we don't want to run and we don't want to fight. Those are tension responses. We want to just learn to relax in that space and kind of walk yourself through it. Remember, tension in the body means I'm going to orgasm quickly. I need to release that tension. Anxiety is tension in the body. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. If you need to, breathe slowly. Do a 4 count. For 4, exhale for 4. And when you're having sex, some of the things that you guys can start to do is, and I think you started to allude to this earlier, one thing that I have found, and this is one of the useful tips that the men who have had this, who have come back, have said, and this is useful for women too. Many times when we first start having sex, the sensation, the feels, everything is really intense in the beginning, right? So it's like your body's reacting. It's kind of like, as soon as you're doing it, like everything in your body just kind of like awakens and you're like, and it's this thing. And I find that if we're able to prolong the first few minutes of sex, then sex generally lasts much longer because it's kind of like they become desensitized almost. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, I've been in, I've been out. Like, I know what this feels like. Like, the newness is somewhat gone. And so one of the things I would encourage men and women to do is to, like, if you're with a partner, slowly enter. And if you're with a compassionate partner, right, this is where compassion comes in. Like, stand still. Don't move, right? Practice the pelvic floor engagement. Practice breathing. Instead of going in and fucking like a jackrabbit, start off slowly, right? As you feel the tension building, stop, breathe, relax the body. You might, again, feel your erection die down a little bit. It's going to come back. It's okay. Engage in the process again and keep doing this. And what I find is that if you're able to do this for the first few minutes, you start off slow. And I don't think there's anything wrong with going slow. Even if you're with a partner who loves like rough, hard sex, start slow. It kind of desensitizes. It's kind of like it's like this gradual builder of confidence as well. It's like, oh, okay, I've been having sex for a minute and I haven't released orgasm yet. You know, like, oh, it's been 3 minutes and I haven't come yet. Like, here we go. Like, okay, I got this. Like, I can do this. And so then you can find, you know, more of a good rhythm and you just kind of stick with it. And again, if you feel yourself starting to reach climax, you should know where you're at. Stop, pull out, relax. This is a great time to maybe go back to oral sex. This is a great time to switch positions, kiss your partner, like do different things to kind of like, okay, give my body a chance to calm down. Like if I've reached this point and calm down. And these are really useful techniques that when you engage in the process completely and you have a willing partner who's willing to be compassionate and understanding, sex generally gets much better, and it lasts much longer.
Yeah. And no matter what, like, even like you said, if somebody is, if both of you or one of you is into like rough, hard sex, like you will still be happier, like with that being longer. So like, okay, the first few minutes, like, let's be slow here. Like, I don't think there's anybody who's like, no, I'd rather just like have this for 30 seconds. Like, no, most people are interested in understanding. And especially, like we said, that there is so much shame around this, especially for men, you know, because it's just, it's like, it's upsetting, you know, and like, it's really hard to talk about. But that's where it's having like, okay, having a compassionate part, like ideally the person that you're having sex with understands this and like actually cares about you. I guess let's preface that, right? But
let's hope, yeah.
That's super important. That's the whole thing too. But you know, yeah, just being like intimate is way more than just like, hey, like let's do, like, so most people are going to be understanding of that. And especially if you're explaining like, hey, these are some struggles that I've been dealing with. This is what I'm trying to do to work on it. And again, it can feel kind of like weird to share all that, but it's like, I would much rather know that, right? Like, I think any like actual partner would much rather know that, even like early on, you know, like, because then also it's like, oh, did I do something? Like what, you know, like the other partner can start to wonder too, like about themselves. And like, there's just a lot of confusion around this if it's not discussed. And
it adds a lot of tension to a relationship. And, you know,
and like you said, it's already anxiety, especially early on. Like there's already an anxiety provoking situation when you don't really know someone. And there's like all this, you know, like just, I guess, performance anxiety, right? Is that like a real term?
Yeah,
that's probably
absolutely.
A term.
Well, one other thing I actually wanted to say too is use condoms. I think sometimes when we're not using protection or when there's no condom that's being used, like sometimes it's like, 'cause some men will tell you that they're too sensitive. Oh, and here's another thing. I don't ever recommend any of those like products that like numb you, because there's like numbing cream that's out there that men use. There's like actual lube that, because some men will tell you like, I'm really sensitive to the touch, right? And so as soon as I feel something, I start to ejaculate. And so they're like, they start using numbing creams, which they feel like is going to make their penis numb. And it just what ends up happening is it also rubs off onto her. And so she's numb in the process. And so we have like, no one experiences it. I just don't, I haven't had anybody who's had really good results with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes using a condom is a great like way to desensitize yourself a little bit and prolong sex. Especially if it's a brand new partner, right? Like safe sex practices are always, useful technique. But, I've told people like, okay, would you rather have an orgasm and he wears a condom, or would you rather him, release really quickly and you not have an orgasm or enjoy sex as much? Like, what's more important? Like, okay, I'd rather enjoy sex and just deal with the fact that he might wear a condom once in a while, and that's okay.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of, this was like packed with information, and we really hope this was helpful, because this is such a, would you say a lot of people, I mean, obviously
this is
counseled
a problem
lot
that
of,
is very much increasing because of the availability and the access and the use of porn, and like in social media too propagates it. And
yeah, because I mean, technically, like, you know, pornographic materials obviously most of the time thought of as people having sex, right? But for someone who maybe is, I would say for the, like the porn fast as well, right? Like maybe if you are following, you know, some pages on social media, you know, on particularly Instagram or TikTok that are very sexual in nature, maybe time to either unfollow or mute, right? Because like maybe you're not watching porn now, but like now you're just like seeing all this or like following all these girls or whatever, right? Which again, maybe isn't an issue at another time, but when you're in this process, that could certainly just like keep that loop open, right? And you're not fully doing that like fast. So when people do that, like, do you think there ever is a time that they can add it back in like appropriately, or is it usually just better to be like, hey, if you've had this issue before, it's kind of hard to add it back in sparingly. It's kind of like anything, right? Like,
right. You know,
do you want to restart this whole cycle?
Do you possess the ability to regulate it?
Yeah.
For some people, they can watch it once in a while and not have an issue with it. Other people, it's a daily thing. Other people are like, no, I don't need it at all. Like, it doesn't do anything for me. And so if you can be responsible with it, sure, I don't see there's anything necessarily wrong with popping on porn once in a while. And some couples will say like, hey, I like watching porn with my spouse or my partner, and it turns us on. It's like, great. Well, if you don't have any issues with it, then you don't have any issues with it, and then go enjoy yourself. Like what works for one couple does not work for all. So this isn't a
no. But if you've had an issue,
I generally will tell people, if you've had an issue with it, you don't need it.
Yeah.
And you have a higher likelihood of relapse. So just stay away from it. If you can get and maintain your erection, and you can prolong sex, and you're having fun, then visualize the partners that you're with, and create the fantasies in your mind, and not rely on pornography to do it for you, where you're more likely to just keep kind of clicking through things, you know.
For sure. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know it was a little bit different than our normal ones, but we hope that it was really useful for both parties, because I think that this can also open up the conversation for women listening, maybe to have a deeper understanding here, and then maybe potentially talk with their partners about this, etc. So as always, thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any other questions about coaching, mentorship, or consulting, you can visit teamliquifit.com. And if you would like to work with Rick for counseling, where can they reach you?
fullcircletherapyfl@gmail.com.
Yes, that was the correct email. I can vouch for that. Thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next week.